There are a lot of benefits of applying data driven hiring. You have to understand the cons also to some degree. Without understanding the cons, if you just push for AI powered tool into the hiring process, that could lead into a different type of bias as well. It used to say the data is the new oil, right? So data can be really, really powerful in that context because it can provide you a lot of insights if it is applied correctly. Data numbers don't tell a lie, but it's also always don't tell you the truth unless and until you contextualize it correctly. You put the right preface to this and then you analyze it and interpret it correctly.
All right, we are live on the Objective Hiring Show. Today we're joined by Dan. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Tim.
It's absolutely our pleasure to have you on the show. And where I love to start with each guest is just to hear a little bit about yourself. Like, who are we speaking to today? Who are we listening to today?
So I'm Dan Sarkar, and I am currently the head of data in Penala. I have been working in data analytics, strategy, and data science almost over a decade now. So almost 15 plus years in the industry. Worked in different roles, and in various of my previous journeys. And I have been very ingrained with data analytics and building data strategy. With applying different types of techniques, methods, and statistical modeling and all those things in the past several years.
And I'm sure a big part of your leadership role in analytics has been hiring good people to join you on the team and to help execute the strategy. And so I'd love to start a discussion around the use of data in hiring itself, because I feel like traditional hiring, not necessarily that data driven. I'd say almost like intuitive or emotionally driven a lot of the time. How do you think about using data in hiring versus maybe intuition and gut feel? And yeah, what's your general view of things?
That's a great question. If you think through this part, right? So, intuition based hiring has always probably going to be a little bit biased to some degree because humans are it is subjective in decision making, and it's probably introduce some level of bias into the process. Versus if you look into data informed based or AI driven analytics or AI based tools that is kind of penetrating in all sector of industry currently, including HR analytics. You can tend to at least remove some of those biases because they would be much more objective driven. It would be more finding out the skills and as well as different types of candidates ability personal traits in an appropriate manner that can help you to reduce the bias. Having said that, I would also tell you that these AI powered tool or these data driven tools that you are using for different types of screening or in the hiring process should be somewhat complementary, not a replacement of human intuition based hiring, because there are definitely advantages because it could bring you better efficiency. It would get you the right type of candidate. You could find and figure out the hiring, the gaps in your workforce. And of course it could improve the inclusiveness. So there are a lot of benefits of applying data driven hiring. However, there are also cons of it, and you have to understand the cons also to some degree. Without understanding the cons, if you just push for AI based tools and AI powered tool into the hiring process, that could lead into a different type of bias as well. So it's very important that you do a striking balance between these two components, utilizing the different types of data driven hiring process but not replacing as well as some of the intuition, because that can help you to understand the personal traits, the cultural fit, and some of the other side of the candidate's experience that is important to consider here.
For those other aspects you've just mentioned, you mentioned cultural fit, Um, for example, uh, they tend to be a bit more subjective. Is that fair to say? Uh, and if so, is there potentially a danger that uh, if too much of our hiring process is based on subjective factors, then we're going to lead ourselves astray and make those hiring errors because we're not focused on the objective things that we can measure.
Yeah, I think that there is that component, it's there, and that's why applying this AI power tool into the hiring process can improve your efficiency, can find and eradicate some of those loopholes into the hiring process. So you're very correct, right? One aspect is that, of course, the soft skill component of it. Huh? That's also another trait that probably intuition based hiring can able to measure more accurately perhaps than AI powered tool. Huh. But to that point also, you have to think about that the AI powered tool also comes with its own quirks and nuances, right? For example, there could be algorithmic bias, huh, or the fairness of it, and you have seen some of the things in the hiring process in the past. For example, few probably some time back, there was a tool that Amazon introduced for a hiring process, and Reuters reported that that tool has some issues, and they had to scrape that tool. Right. So there are pros and cons on both sides of it, but striking that balance is really important in this case, so that if you want to go into a more fair hiring process, I would say.
Yeah, I remember reading about that Amazon tool, that was a while ago now. That was 10 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, it happened in the past, and it could happen again in the future too, unless and until you are really careful. The part of it is you have to think about, and this is where I would say, coming from a data science background or stemming from an analytics background, I would say that numbers don't lie, but at the same times, numbers always don't tell you the true story unless and until you really, really contextualize it, unless and until you make sure to interpret the numbers, correctly in the proper way. Huh, that could also lead into a different level of bias, and so on and so forth. So that's why it is important that you do a striking balance and you understand these nuances when you are applying the tools, huh, as well as you are making your hiring decision and creating a structure for evaluation.
Part of the challenge is probably going to be then that the parts of the organization that are responsible for implementing these tools or not, it's typically going to be HR or talent acquisition. You could argue probably not the team that has the most knowledge around data, AI, machine learning, etc. Normally, like typically people running talent teams come from a kind of softer skills background. It'd be very rare, for example, to see a data scientist heading up talent or a software engineer or any kind of engineer for that matter or a scientist. And so I feel like that's going to be a challenge. Um, and so maybe there's almost like a skills gap or some extra skills or knowledge that those teams might need to put themselves in a position to properly evaluate these tools. Would you agree with that?
You're spot on. I think when you are building, when you are bringing a new tool into your hiring process, it is extremely critical that you evaluate the tool in a proper context, in a proper way. What is your hiring objective should be in the organization, or what type of roles you are trying to fill, or figuring it out. What are some of the gaps you are seeing currently? At least a tool is showing you, are these the right things to implement? Because the hiring is a tricky thing, but to that point, every company's hiring could be very different depending on what they are trying to fill for that role, right? So if you take one tool and try to customize it, that has been designed for a certain company or with a certain use case in mind, and then if you apply that to a different context and a company, it could be similar or it could be different. Also, the factor is that yes, there are subjectivity in the human hiring, but sometimes the output driven by the tools can be also misleading, so that you have to really understand the nuances and strike that balance. So the argument goes in both ways. So yes, you do have to have the knowledge and skill when you are bringing these type of tools into your organization, but at the same time you have to also evaluate them correctly based on your criteria, based on what you are trying to achieve, from your departments.
Yes, perhaps one area we could drill down on a little bit might be that application screening step, because I'd say pretty much any company in the world would have job ads with candidates applying with a resume, maybe some application questions. And then typically what they've done is had someone in talent acquisition or HR manually screen through those resumes, compare it to a job ad, compare it to some words they've been given by the hiring manager of what to look for. And they'll take it from the, I don't know, 500 applications down to a short list of 50, let's say. And so maybe that's an interesting potential use case of AI to explore that kind of automated screening step. Uh, I feel like, at least in theory, the use case for some kind of large language model screening is a bit of a no brainer now, because, of course, it could be done much quicker. It could be done in milliseconds as soon as an applicant comes in, rather than waiting for someone in HR to come in on Monday morning to screen it. So there's that kind of dimension. But then there's the, I think, consistency that, again, it should be able to deliver, because as opposed to some human, reading a CV and they're onto their 500th CV of the day and they're like pretty bored of it by then. The AI doesn't get bored. AI doesn't have all their biases around the people they like, the people they don't like. And so in feeding it a very clear set of instructions, here's exactly the 10 things I'm looking for. Go and rank score my resumes. And you could even imagine having like multiple models doing this at the same time and taking an average of the models. Like, it's got so much opportunity to make it way more transparent and measurable in a way that currently it isn't. So I don't quite get the kind of pros and cons on both side argument for this. To me, it seems like a pretty one-sided affair. What do you think?
Yeah. I so I think I agree with you that if you use these tools, it can drastically improve the screening efficiency and so on and so forth, right? Because like definitely someone doesn't have to go through the 500 resumes, and if you can plug the right type of keywords that you are looking for a specific role and ask that large language model to go through it, it should be able to tease it out correctly unless and until the model hallucinates in some shape and form, right? So that's definitely the today's technology is there that they would be able to do it. Now, one of the things is that it is, of course, in a lot of times, if you fit the right instruction, then you probably get the right input. But at the same time, you might miss some traits if there is no human interaction or no human review, because model will be very very model driven, right? So it's very very robotic in nature. It will be able to tease it out, unless and until you have all the intelligence built into the model, then it could be a different case. But large language model at this point is doing a lot better than it used to be a couple of years back, in this context, of course. But at the same time, we haven't reached into the point where it will be able to tease out emotional intelligence part of it from a resume, or where we haven't reached out to a point where we it would be able to say that, hey, we are not in the age of, at this point, still AGI, to a true sense. So we are still achieving that. We are kind of making progress towards that direction. So I think you have to understand that context as well when you are utilizing these tools in the process of screening. And this is coming from my data science background, right? Because I know how this model works. I have seen this, how these models have been built in a product, and that's where it becomes much more, all these nuances should be probably considered, to some degree, if you want to make the process really, really fair and transparent.
Let me ask you this then. So let's say you had a bet for your life. Okay, your life depended on this bet, and you could choose to have a typical, let's say, resume screening HR person do a screen for your resumes, or you could have, let's say, ChatGPT or some combination of large language models that you could prompt and you could tell it what to look for. So you could prompt the HR, you could prompt the LLM, and you need to screen, I don't know, 1,000 resumes over a week or something, and the accuracy had to be as high as possible. Define that however you like. And you had to choose either any HR generalist or a combination of models. Which one would you choose currently and why?
I would actually take, if there is an opportunity to have both, so that human oversight with the AI models, that would be my answer in this case. And part of it is because it's, as I said to you, that these models and these tools are great. It can make the process probably efficient, but at the same time, it is also trained based on the historic data, and the past behavior is not always indicative of the future, right? You know this context really well. So some level of like humans in the loop will be good, but yes, if you are getting a large volume of documents or large volume of resume and you have to narrow it down, then probably the first phase could be this AI based, some sort of a rubric that you apply. But definitely some point, some human oversight will be probably be necessary too.
So then it's fair to say you would currently see AI as more of an efficiency, time saving automation tool as opposed to an accuracy, intelligent, improving, making the process better tool. Is that that's a broad summary? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say, to a large extent, it is still the case. Of course, we can. Some people will argue in this case that okay, we are getting into the era of artificial general intelligence when these machines will become, more and more intelligent and they can able to do different things. Agent AI is becoming more and more predominant, and hopefully, that will take, going to be also the future, for some of these tools in the HR analytics that you are kind of bringing into here as a use case. But still it's not there, and we still have to go through some miles before we can achieve that state.
We'd recently done a project to build a pipeline between ChatGPT and Claude. And for our product, which is a skills assessment platform, traditionally we'd always engage with experts to write questions, test questions. And so let's say we might have hired someone like you to write a question about machine learning or marketing analytics or whatever. And then we would have that question and we would share it with another expert in the same domain to review it, like a peer review system. As part of that, we'd have developed like this kind of comprehensive definition of what a good question is and all the types of traps to avoid. We built a content management system to then do all the kind of data validation checks. And so we had this kind of elaborate process to write, review, and publish a question on our platform, which like the end outcome was pretty good. Like the question quality is good, but obviously very, very slow, very, very expensive, and quite unscalable because if we wanted to suddenly go across, I don't know, 100 domains that are far away from our own skill set, it's kind of hard to then go and find experts when you yourself have no experience. You see what I mean? And so we had that process, and we recently had used then a project to test like how good is large language models now doing this kind of work. And so we managed to build a fairly comprehensive pipeline where ChatGPT writes a question, Claude reviews it in this back and forth programmatic way with then all these levels of data validation. Of course, it took us a few weeks to iterate through a prompt to get a consistent output. But basically, we've ultimately found a way that we have the same quality of question produced at 99.99% cheaper cost and infinitely scalable in the sense that we can now create a question about any concept in the world as long as it's a real concept. So that, to me, like that process opened my eyes a lot to the state of AI and how far it's come, or large language models in particular. And I now view, in a lot of the cases, humans more as like a bottleneck in the process, and that we should be redesigning to get out of the way of these large language models and just let them get on with their job. Like if I could recreate my company and add all these AI models working 24 hours a day when I'm not needed, to me that's a much more exciting approach rather than just, well, kind of human in the loop and they're going to just chip away at the sides. Like I feel like there's a bigger breakthrough than just a little bit of automation here and there.
Yeah. So I think you brought a great point, right? So basically, in your approach, what you are doing, right? So you are applying multiple large language model, and then you are trying to kind of cross validate that, what Claude is doing, what ChatGPT is doing, so on and so forth, right? So this is definitely a really good approach, and I think it will help you refine the process to some degree, unless and until both Claude and ChatGPT have been trained with the same data sets and same type of biases. And biased, some of these biases can be, and you recognize it, but so some of these biases maybe you won't know because you just don't think about them, like subjective biases or biases in the data, so on and so forth. But to that point, I think applying multiple models are great in a sense because these models have been coming every new day. There has been a new release, right? So the latest one last week, I think, probably came from Alibaba, right? And they created a large language model, and that was they kind of published it. Before that, it was Grok 3, and before that, it was Claude 3.7, right? So you are consistently seeing that the technology is being improving. People who are building this large language model, they are also adding new stuff. They're testing it in a much more rigorous way than it's probably 2 years back when first time ChatGPT came into the market. So definitely there is an evolution, and that's why these systems are going to be much more reliable. Now, to your point, the other aspects is that yes, human can be a bottleneck in some of these things, and that's an experience I have, not from the HR side of it but from other side of it. One of the challenges you would see probably in the coming era is that adoption of a large language model in the real cases, right? Because yes, you can build a tool, but at the end of the day, people have to start using it, and it needs to be adapted in a correct sense, right? So that's something we are going through in terms of technology and adoption, especially in this space. But so there are use cases in both sides of it. I'm not saying that what you felt is wrong, because sometimes I have seen that in my experience too, in not in HR context but in other contexts. But at the same time, you have to still understand how these models are developed, what is the process, what type of data it has been fed into, what are some of the cases that it could really off trigger things, those type of things, to make sure that you approach this in a correct way.
What about, I'm interested actually in your like day-to-day life. Have you found yourself in the last couple of years using a ChatGPT or a Claude in day-to-day tasks or yeah, stuff in your personal life?
Well, it's a great question. I have played around with a lot of these in the model, not to the extent probably at work, because there are, of course, a lot of the things you still have to ensure what is allowed in work versus what is not. But I have played around with some of the open source model. I have played around with some of the chat gpt, Claude, and different versions of it, even some of the other large language models, right? For example, Meta's AI, and Google's Gemini, Copilot, so all of this I have played at a reasonable extent. And when it started, like 2-3 years back, it was kind of fascinating too, when you have asked ChatGPT different level of questions, and see how it will respond, and what are the where it is really accurate, where it is not. So I have done some of those things.
And still not very good at counting the number of R's in strawberry, apparently.
Yes, so I can tell you that so when I saw that, essentially what I did is that I asked that, and it said two times, first time wrong, right? And basically I have instructed it to write a Python program and count the number of R's. So the next time it did that, and then I asked you again, what is the number of R's in the strawberry, it was able to say that correctly. So yes.
To think now just a little bit bigger picture of where you think hiring then is going in the next couple of years, let's say particularly for analytics and data science roles, like will we still be doing will we still be doing, I don't know, job ad, resume screen with HR, technical interview, reference check, offer? Like, is that still going to be the process in 2 years, or will it look fundamentally different to the way it's currently being done? What do you think is going to happen?
I think what you are going to see, of course, adoptions of this AI powered tool into the hiring process more and more. So definitely that's a trend you are going to see. Now, whether that would fully replace, all the processes you mentioned, multiple initial screening and, multiple rounds of interview and, evaluation and so on and so forth that you currently see. It may not be right. So that's like one traits you are going to see. The other traits you are going to see, perhaps, the knowledge, the in the candidate side also, what is currently today is there versus what it used to be, right? Because now people have all access of all these, large language models and GPTs and so on and so forth. So traditional way of how people have learned versus currently the candidates will learn, that will be, there is a difference too. So the key here, I think, you know every company is probably different. As long as they can understand that what is their objective is and utilize these tools correctly into the hiring process, I think it's a win. But again, you have to understand that from the context of what these models are able to produce and so on and so forth. In your case, of course, you seems like that you kind of figure it out quite a bit into the process, right? Understanding different types of language models and applying them in the context of hiring, and that's probably is the key. But not all companies actually have reach to that level of maturity. So some companies have to go extra mile, perhaps, and then some companies, of course, companies like Google, who have already tried to revolutionize the HR analytics, in the past, they probably know all these traits, and they're going to probably push for better tools and analytics into the hiring process more and more in the future. And some of it could also replace the lot of these steps into the humans into the process as we move forward.
Yeah, I suspect those massive tech companies are where you'd see a lot of the adoption because they have the volume. Any investment they do in the process is worth it. If you're hiring, I don't know, 50,000 people a year or something, they've got thousands of data scientists and engineers who could help build these tools internally anyway at a good level. So that kind of makes sense. That's probably where the innovation would come. I'm really interested in the analog to sports recruitment. I don't know if you ever seen the movie Moneyball?
I have heard about it. I have not seen it.
Yeah. So it's probably about 25 years old now, at least the story, not the movie. And it was about the revolution of baseball recruitment, moving away from this purely intuition, gut feel based approach to one that's based on metrics. And it's just such a fascinating case study with what I think is going to happen now in hiring for day to day roles. Because back in the day, there was so many, all the scouts would use these kind of little indicators or signs that they thought gave them a clue of who a good player was, including things like, oh, you know, how attractive is the player's girlfriend? That then dictates how confident they are. Therefore, if they're confident, they're going to play well, and these kinds of things. And this is probably no different to, oh, well, he's got a 2-page resume, not a 3-page, and I like that. And they use the right font on the resume, and I like the way that they did it. All these things all these kind of rules of thumb that we've been using that probably have no predictive power at all then got replaced by this ruthless data driven approach. And at least in the case of the baseball team, suddenly they saw an uptick in their performance once they managed to recruit all these players at very low cost who were drastically undervalued by the market. And that was 25 years ago. And interestingly, it wasn't until I think the last 5 or 6 or 7 years that started to happen in football in Europe. And even just as of last week, I heard the owner of Manchester United say the key reason why they've wasted £1 billion in the last 15 years is because they have no data analytics at all in recruitment. They still use these kind of intuition based approaches in hiring, much to their detriment. Now, maybe in regular business, it's not as obvious when you're winning or losing. You don't necessarily have a points table maybe it takes longer to manifest. So maybe it's like just plays out over a longer period. Maybe also we don't have good metrics. Maybe that's part of the problem. It's like there's not as obvious metrics of success or failure as opposed to a sports team. But yeah, I'm interested in that analogy. Uh, yeah, what do you think will be like the breakthrough in moving towards that data driven approach? Anything in particular?
It's a. I think you got a great point, and bringing the in the comments from Manchester United, right? And some sport in sports, of course, a lot of these sports in modern sports at least run by analytics, right? Because if you, it's not in every cases, maybe Manchester United is one case, but if you look into, like, let's say basketball, right, the Golden State Warriors, and they are very data driven, right? So they will always look into how many points Curry is doing versus how many points Draymond is making, and all those things, like starting from rebounds to everything, right? So sports analytics has become more and more data driven, for sure, huh? And a lot of these sports teams have great analytics team, huh? It is also a fact in today's world. But you would there is, of course, data can be very powerful, right? Data is, a few years back, of course, right now that's not the no longer is anymore the main thing. It used to say the data is the new oil, right? So data can be really, really powerful in that context, because it can provide you a lot of insights, if it is applied correctly. And sports analytics teams have started recognizing that, and they are moving utilizing data analytics to the extent that they could, but it's not data driven, I would say. It's more data informed, because again, I told you this thing, this is coming from my own experience, right? Data can be very powerful. Data numbers don't tell lie, but you have to, it's also always don't tell you the truth unless and until you contextualize it correctly. You put the right preface to this, and then you analyze it and interpret it correctly. So that part is still going to be there. Now, can large language model replace it? Yes, there is a potential of that, if the large language model have that context and they can get better and better. But still, it's at this point it's not there, in today's world. So it's probably the future.
Maybe to step back a second and think about more the problems, like, because then that would give us an indicator of where the solutions might come later on. Like, in your view, is there a particular common problem that you see when companies try to hire data people that really needs to be solved?
Yeah, it's a great question. To be honest with you, sometimes it's I don't know whether it's a common problem, across industry or every industry, but in some roles it could be, previously, data science roles have been to a large extent, because a lot of times people really didn't understand what a data scientist should be doing, and there but I think that has streamlined over the years. At this point, probably it's much better, but at the same time, you are seeing more and more things are getting into the AI side of it, right? So that's becoming the main role. So so part of it is that, yes, there is that factor exists to a certain extent, that what data people should be doing, and when they hire people to make sure that what type of problems they would be solving. But again, it's also give a great opportunity for people in the data, right? So that they can shape it. One way to think about is that, yes, companies may not know that, but you can also go into that position and figure things out and show them. But the key here is, of course, I think in bulk of the companies, or most of the companies, that you have to think about, what is the business value, right? Or is the business first approach? And sometimes, of course, in data analytics and data science, people haven't fully perceive that correctly, whether when they're hiring people, or versus what they're bringing into the table, and so on and so forth. And that there is definitely some room for improvement for that.
What about in terms of candidate friendliness. Like one thing that comes up again and again is you're having a nice process for the candidates, and I can certainly see how if people are thinking about more of an AI driven hiring process in the future, they would almost automatically think, oh, that's maybe going to be worse for the candidate, or somehow like a less human experience, which I would personally debate, but that's by the by. Um, yeah, any kind of quick wins we can come up with to make the process a little bit more candidate friendly? Anything you've seen work well in the past?
Yeah, I think, it's a great point because there is that concern is there in the applying or over applying AI into that you will lose that personal touch. That because machine tend to be robotic, but at the same time, I think applying some sort of a machine is always gives you that consistency that you may not also get from the humans. So there is a two aspects, two parts to this, right? Uh, but in terms of candidate friendliness, I would definitely encourage that because that's a very big component of it. Because you have to think from the candidate perspective also that they are putting their time and energy and so on and so forth. And sometimes these hiring can be long. Process can be long. It could be multiple rounds of interviews that can drag these things, and that also increases the cost, but also candidates gets burned out, they lose the interest, or people are ghosting them, they don't hear back, and there are a lot of biases into the hiring process, right? And that's where I think the AI could do a lot better job, because it could make the process really efficient. It could also bring into the fairness and so on and so forth, and you don't have to deal with that. So the argument goes in both ways, but it's just like have to striking a balance, because if AI misfire in some cases, then that needs to be also be caught, and should be prevent. So that's why the some sort of a oversight is needed, and you could apply multiple machines to do that too, or you could bring, I mean, right humans into the process, and they could do that for you, along with the AI. So that's something you have to think about, when you are putting these processes into place.
And maybe this is good. We should aim higher, but are we almost holding AI to an impossible standard? Because all the things you've spoken about there, we don't currently hold humans to that standard. There's no transparency over, how your resume was rejected, who rejected it, why did they reject it, under what grounds did they do it, did they score it? Like, um, we don't currently have that for humans. So part of my concern is not comparing AI to some perfect imaginary hiring process, but comparing it to the way humans currently do it. And is it better or not? It might, maybe there's some pros and cons, but doing like a fair evaluation against that versus some, perfect utopia that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I can totally see that, because I think humans are definitely can be erratic in terms of their behavior, their moods, and so on and so forth. And to that point, of course, the bar is probably really high, when we are trying to measure this AI versus humans, because in theory, humans are also probably making a lot of mistakes, but they are probably more lenient to it versus when AI is making a mistake and they are making a big deal of this. So definitely that's something over time that needs to be straightened out, and I think more and more people will start using these AI systems. They would able to see the benefit of it, and more and more we can remove the fear, of that, hey, AI is going to create havoc and this and that type of things. That's probably going to help the adoption, and maybe we won't be comparing it to an utopia standard, but to that point, of course there is a difference, right? We know, how the AI kind of currently processes the information when it makes the logic, when a large language model creates a finishes sentence for it, what logic it use, versus a human when they think about something, how they used to perceive that and how they approach it, right? So I think that part, it's still not, that's the part of science and the technology and all the things that are happening today. So yes, the comparison probably is not fair, Huh, and I can totally see that, and I have seen this, of course, in my experience too. But of course, if you put something, aim something higher, then odds are that this AI systems will do a lot better job, and people will be probably less critiquing these AI systems. How it is making so much problems and so much errors and so on and so forth. Rather, they would take that and try to incorporate that on their day-to-day life and make it more efficient, I would say, in the whole process.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see where things go in the next few years. Dan, if you could ask our next guest any question about hiring, what would you choose to ask them?
So if I would ask next question, about hiring, I would say that how would you strike a balance between objective hiring and some of the intuitions, so that your hiring becomes really, really fair, transparent, and efficient.
Okay, that's a great question, which I will level at the next guest, whoever that may be, some point next week. And I'm looking forward to hearing what they say. Dan, it's been a great conversation today. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing all your insights with our audience.
Thanks, Tim, for having me. It was a pleasure talking with you.